tomorrow, or maybe from the next week onwards, we can start the classes more rigorously and more organized way. So yeah, I wish it was different times. This is the first time that I'm teaching. Of course, last year I taught half of Sociology of India online, okay, but it was not in the video mode. I did it in a different way. So this is my first time teaching Sociology of India in the last 10 years in this mode. So I don't know how to communicate with you things, if it will get communicated in the right way and other kinds of things. So what I request you all who will be staying back in the course is that I like to have an interactive class. You can always ask me questions any point of time. Okay, you can just raise your hand and ask me question, because I feel the class gets more interesting only when students ask questions and doubts. And one has to remember that there's nothing wrong question or right question, or a brilliant question or something like that. It's all about we engaging in a discussion about certain issues that kind of is close to our lives, because this is a course on Sociology of India, which will be talking about the place we live in, the geographical, the political space that we occupy, and we as citizens of India also uh, think that we understand India in many different ways. We do definitely, but maybe there are other things and the other ways of understanding it also, which needs to be kind of taken into account in our everyday life, everyday politics, everyday cultural concepts, etc. And that is there, and that becomes more interesting when people, students coming from different backgrounds, different regions, different kinds of cultures, etc., pitch in the classroom to ask questions, to bring the viewpoint and the experiences, especially your experiences. I may say something, but your experience may be different, and maybe your classmates may say something and your experience may be different in terms of understanding the social, cultural, political life of India. And I expect that if you people speak, give your opinions, and kind of ask questions, doubts, share things. Anyone is saying something? Hello? Yeah, I mean, unless you're asking a question, can you switch off your microphone? Arjun, are you saying something?
No, my mic was on. I didn't realize.
Okay,
Sorry, ma'am.
yeah. Oh, yeah, it's okay. So what I'm trying to say in overall is that, see, one is that it's very difficult. This is an online mode, and it's definitely difficult, more difficult for you people to do all these courses on online, and and your conditions may be very different than mine here. But it's also difficult for me to teach a course of Sociology of India, which is kind of inherently pluralistic, which is inherently complex, etc., like any other society, to kind of pass it on, to discuss it in an online mode where I can't see your expressions, I can't see your faces, I don't exactly know who you all are. Okay, generally I try to remember names, and I try to kind of gather information in many different ways from students to just understand the background, because it helps also enrich the course. So as much as, I mean, I will try to make the class interesting, but I cannot I don't know whether it will be interesting for you or not. What you can do to make the class interesting is, if you're paying attention, if you are there around, then definitely I would encourage you and I would request you to kind of ask questions, share your doubts, kind of make remarks, yeah, share your experiences, etc. And that's how the class will become. We will debate about things, we will disagree about things, etc. We may agree and disagree about things. So that will make the class interesting. So it's a request that whoever stays back in this course kind of get into that mode in one way. But most importantly is that we will vary and differ and disagree a lot. Okay, from the beginning, I can say you that with my experiences of teaching in the last so many years, as well as given the fact that we all have different experiences and come from different backgrounds, I will learn from you, you will learn from me, and we will disagree a lot. As long as this disagreement is respectful in the boundaries of civility, etc. It's not hurting the sentiments of the marginalized, or it is not hurting personal sentiments. See, personal sentiments may get hurt, but if it's for the right purpose, there is no problem. Okay, the problem is when the marginalized, or when the side when stereotypes are brought in, marginalized are attacked. That's when I will interfere and I'll say, no, you cannot talk like that or something, and I'll be very harsh then. Okay, that is when so what my point is, that we will do it very respectfully. We will do it, we will disagree, we will debate, we will not kind of see eye to eye in many things. Maybe your classmates and you also will not, but you have to be within a line, and definitely no stereotyping, no attacking marginalized people, groups or individuals or whatever it is. And yeah, this also is a complex thing. So I mean, and when I'm saying that your sentiments should not be hurt, I will be hurting your sentiments in many ways by bringing in aspects maybe that you may not be thinking through in some ways. But yes, I maybe I will have, after all, I will have the last word in some ways as a faculty, as a teacher. So I will try not to impose myself, but it's necessary, I will do that. So I have sent the course outline to you. The other thing that I wanted to tell to students who would stay back in this course is that for me, what is important is not that we finish the course. What is important is that we take each of the themes very seriously. We discuss each of the themes very elaborately and within the time frame and given the constraints of online teaching, etc. And I'm not sure if this time also you have regular kind of continuous evaluation, given all those kind of hindrances or whatever problems, issues that you have and difficulties. I would emphasize that even if I finish 3 or 4 units, we will do it in a more elaborate, in-depth manner. So even if I have circulated the course outline to you, it has 5 units, I think, and I may not finish I will try to finish all the 5 units. But in case something gets left out, it is not because I don't want to teach, but because I may go in depth into certain things, and maybe the class discussions and others will take up more time. So if you are prepared for that, then take this course. The other thing that I wanted to tell about is that, given the fact that we are doing sociology of India in a very, very difficult time in the history of this nation, and you may agree or not agree that these are difficult times, not because of the pandemic, but otherwise also. Uh, uh, I think what we have to begin this course by understanding that India is a multi-pluralistic, uh, cultural, social, political space, and we have to approach this course through that. Okay, so I am not going to teach you the cultures of India. I'm not going to teach you in the unit on tribes, on the different dressing pattern, food patterns, habits, dances and cultures of tribes in India. I'm not going to teach in this class that caste is going away and caste doesn't matter in India. And nor am I going to give you a very cultural, colorful portrait of India. Okay. We will be discussing, if you're going to stay back in this course, remember this term, we will be discussing the political economy of the institutions of India. When I say institutions of India, I mean caste is an institution, religion is an institution, family is an institution. Okay, your court is an institution, law is an institution. So in that sense, okay, yeah, in that sense, what I'm trying to say is that this course is not about you kind of glorifying India or putting it down. This course is not about cultural, social, positive or negative things about in India. It is about the institutions of India, that makes of India, and the lives of the people in India, and the political economy. And I'll explain to you what political economy means. In fact, in the next few classes that I'll be taking, I'll be giving you introductions to certain terms, certain concepts that will be very, very helpful for you to understand the different units that we are going to do: caste, family, gender, and tribes, etc. I will be giving you concepts like intersectionality. I'll be giving you concepts like capitals, different kinds of capitals, etc. So and many more such concepts which will help you understand the institutions of India, the functions of these institutions, the processes that it follows, the rules and regulations that makes up this institution.
Your voice is not coming.
Yeah. Am I back in the meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am. Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know
Yes,
what
ma'am.
happened. I really don't know. I mean, this is what happens with online classes anyway. Oh God. Yeah. Okay, sorry. I hope this continues. Anyway, I'll give a short introduction and review, and maybe we can start next week. I'll figure out what's happening with my laptop and other things. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that in this course, maybe we will be trying to debate a lot more, and we will be trying to look at the political economy of things. Okay, when I say political economy, I mean that that the rules, regulations, the norms, the values, the way of doing of things of family, or in India, or families in India. There's not one kind of family in India, or caste as an institution, or religion, or tribes, or law. Okay, law for that matter, as an institution, may look very neutral, may look very positive, may look very it's kind of looking at everyone in similar ways. But if we go a little deep into these norms and what these norms and values and rules and regulations mean, then we will see that it is not true that everyone everyone within the family gets benefit of the family, or within the institution of caste or within the institution of tribe gets similar benefits as citizens of the India, or as members of the family, or as members of a caste group, or a caste institution, the institution of caste. So political economy means the structures that make up an institution. Institution here refers to the structures that make up our society. Like caste makes up our society, class makes up our society, ethnicity makes up our society, gender makes our society, okay, law makes our society. So this is what we are going to do in this course, whereby we will be understanding what are these institutions, what constitutes of these institutions, what goes on, does the norms, rules, regulations, values of these institutions affect the members of the institutions, as well as the larger processes of the nation and the politics of the nation, and how does it affect us as citizens of this nation. Okay, so in terms of sociology of India, because India can be understood in many different ways, and I come from sociology, so what I'll be doing is I'll be drawing from sociology as a discipline and the way it has understood India, and or it has kind of studied India. Now, anthropology and sociology, which are sister disciplines, and sociology has come out of anthropology as a discipline, are the first disciplines who have organizedly studied Indian societies for the first time. Okay, there was economics, there was political science, there was kind of other kinds of cultural studies, etc., in Indian context, and people have done for centuries and centuries. Okay, as an organized, established institutional discipline, studying the institutions of Indian society in an organized manner, it was anthropology and sociology which did it for the first time. Okay, so what is special about sociology in that sense is that it is not unlike economics, which deals with economic institution. It's not true today. Every discipline is interdisciplinary, but in general, unlike political science, which deals with the politics and law and the institutions of justice and election politics, etc., etc., political institution, sociology looks at all these institutions and interconnections, and how these institutions are not independent of the social cultural institutions, but all our economic, political, social, legal institutions are all made up of, or are constructed through social, cultural aspects of what constitutes Indian society. So what the basic argument is that sociology of India will discuss about how sociology understands India, being one of the first disciplines to understand Indian societies as a whole, and not just as economic political institutions, but the interconnections of these institutions, which goes on to make up India as a country or a society, or geographical space, or whatever it is, political, social, cultural space. Especially the fact that it argues that economics, legal institutions, etc., are not independent of what is considered as cultural social institutions like caste or class or gender or tribes or ethnicity, etc., or religion. These all kind of gets transferred into the economic and so political institutions, legal institution, and we need to turn a critical eye towards it. Okay, that's first thing. Any questions if you want to ask, you can ask right now, and I'll move on to the next part. Anything? If you are there and you are listening, can you listen to me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
No, okay. Is it clear what I'm trying to say?
A little bit, yes, ma'am.
Little bit, okay. Yeah, I'm hoping that towards the end it will be better. But in case you have any questions, just raise your hand and ask, because this, you have to be very clear about what this course about is, because you
Ma'am.
may come with a different. Sorry.
Yeah, ma'am. Like, would you explain
Who is
like
this?
what exactly? Ma'am, Titiksha. Hello.
Okay, yeah. Just raise your hand. I'll know. Tell me.
Oh yeah. Ma'am, like when you told like the political economy, so is it what you meant that what the other institutions affect the family's economy or institution's economy or the political conditions? Is that what you meant by political economy?
No, yeah, I know. I mean political economy in the sense that, see, for example, if you look at family, what do you think? Everyone thinks that family is a social institution, right?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
And it has nothing to do with economics, it has nothing to do with law, it has nothing to do with religion, it has nothing to do with other aspects, politics especially. Okay. But that is what is not true. When I say political economy, I mean to say that all institutions have rules, regulations, norms, etc. And all institutions have a politics to it. And I'll explain you in the next few classes concepts where I'll say what is politics, okay? And what is the, what does this politics mean? Politics doesn't mean just election politics, etc. Politics means so many other things, okay? So I'll come to this slowly. When I say political economy, I mean that all institutions have an economic angle to it. All institution has economic impact. All institutional rules, norms, regulations are made in such a way that the economics of that institution is protected. That means the way the rules, regulation, values are made, there is an economic angle to it, and it is not just social. Okay, there is more to it than that looks that we see outside. More to family than a social institution. It is an inherently economic institution. It is an inherently political institution. Same caste. Caste may seem like something of the past we don't follow today, and there is no economics to it today. Caste doesn't matter. But the rules, regulations, characteristics, and values in caste actually make up the economics, not just of the institution of caste and people who live within that, but the institution, but also the economics or larger economics of the society and the nation. So when I'm saying political economy, I mean to say the infrastructures that goes on to make an institution. Okay. When I say infrastructure, I mean to say the rules, the values, the norms, the morals that we follow. In family, we have so many morals that we should respect the elders. Okay, we should love each other. We should take care of each other. Okay, there is a hierarchy which we should need to follow. Okay, we should marry within some groups and not marry within some groups. What are these? These are not just social norms. It is inherently related to the larger economy, and it is an economic. It is a politics of the economics, a politics of the economy of a family that also is inherently related to the politics of caste and the politics that gets done in the political arena as well as the law that are framed. Like, I'll just give you an example to make it clear. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual rights. Okay, why are they not allowed to marry? Is it just a cultural moral fact? Is it just a it's a matter of sexuality or something like that? No, these are all there, but it goes on to the point of economics to it. The economics of family, the economics of gender. Gender constitute an economy. Okay, so that it is not that LGBTQ people are not allowed to marry or have jobs in this country. Okay, now they are accepted as equal citizens in their way, but they are still not allowed to get married, or they are not allowed to kind of adopt, etc., etc. And there is an economics to it, and the economics comes back when you understand family and gender. You will understand the economy, the law that does not allow these people or these individuals and groups to actually exercise their rights as equal citizens. So what I'm trying to say when I'm saying political economy, I am trying to say that the laws, morals, values, norms, the rituals, the everyday festivals, everything, and the everyday norms that we follow in our daily lives, rules and regulations, this may be very, very kind of frivolous to us, and we may think that, oh, this doesn't make a big impact. But no, these are all things that goes on to constitute an institution, and these institutions are caste, class, gender, ethnicity, religion, etc., it's law, etc. And this is what we are going to explore in this course. What are these institutions in India? What makes up these institutions? How does it impact individuals and groups? The norms, rules, regulations of this institution, which is seen as cultural, actually has a lot of economic, political impact on lives of individuals and groups. That's what I mean to say when I say political economy. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am, it's understood now.
Okay. So that's one thing. So if you come to the course outline, anyway, I will slowly, when I'm talking the next few classes, I will make things much more clearer. So what I will be doing is that I will be first telling you, this is just the first unit that I have given, Sociology of India, Short History. If you have the course outline in front of you, in that what I'll be doing is I will be giving it out. See, I will be telling you first what is politics. Okay, how do you understand politics? And within that, I will be explaining to you that the knowledge that we have, any kind of knowledge, has a politics to it. Okay. So similarly, understanding India, the way India was first understood through the discipline of anthropology by British anthropologists, by European anthropologists and administrators, okay, with the help of people in India and intellectuals in India, had its own politics. And therefore, knowledge production by itself also needs to be critically looked at. How did we understand India the way we have understood it? And what happened in that process of knowledge production about India, which made certain knowledges as supreme and other knowledges as irrelevant to India? I will explain it better when I'm talking of that in the next class. What I mean to say that in the first unit, I'll be explaining about the knowledge production on Indian society, and did the anthropologists and administrators go wrong in the knowledge production, and kind of in the process erased various multiple ways of Indian life, society, culture, food habits, way of belief systems, okay, marriages, families. They just erased it in the process to portray a very monolithic way of seeing, instead of a pluralistic way of life that Indians lived. Okay, whatever was India that time. Okay, there was no kind of one India or anything like that. So whatever this geographical space was, people lived multiple ways of life. Today also, if you go from UP to to kind of Bihar, or from Bihar to Odisha to Andhra Pradesh, and Andhra Pradesh to Kerala, you will see that not everyone lives similar lives. I'm not talking of just individuals. Marriages are done differently, food habits are different, the same pujas will be done differently, and within that, people will be having different ways of understanding how to go about. It's not just the differences in religion, but within religion, within communities, within caste, there'll be so many different. Like, for example, a Kashmiri Brahmin and a Bengali Brahmin and an Assamese Brahmin or an Odia Brahmin will eat non-veg definitely, will include non-veg in their marriages and sometimes in festivals also. Whereas a UP Brahmin or a Iyengar Brahmin, Iyer Brahmin from Tamil Nadu cannot imagine non-vegetarian food in their houses, in their festivities, in their marriages, even today. So what was happening at that point of time when sociologists and anthropologists were trying to understand India? India was a India was a very, very pluralistic society. Why did certain ideas of India get recorded as the knowledge of India, and others get discarded in the process? So what I'll be doing is I will be telling that the method was the problem. The method of studying was the problem, and that is where the later part by the 1960s and 70s, scholars recognized the problem in the method that was followed to understand India, and in that process kind of try to bring out more information, more knowledges about the lifestyles and societies in India. But which was established by the British administrators, etc., remains powerful even today. For example, India is a vegetarian country. Okay. For example, telling that Indian history can be divided into only three parts: the Aryan, the Mughals, and then the Hindu Aryans, the Muslim Mughals, and then the modern. They don't call themselves as the British period, but they call it the modern India. Okay. So I will get into it more elaborately. What I will be doing in that unit is kind of tell you that in knowledge production lies a politics. Whose knowledge gets accepted, whose knowledge becomes the knowledge of India, and whose lifestyles and knowledge kind of were sidelined in the process, and how it is impacting us today. We may think that why should we understand that? We, especially today, we have to understand it because there are so many debates that are going on, that who is an Indian, what food is Indian food, okay, who is a nationalist, who have come from outside, what is the right way of marrying, what is the right way of not having food, not interacting with people, etc. So there are so many different notions today which has come to become very, very important, and around which politics and nationalism and everything is being played out, and violence is being unfolded on people who are protesting against it, etc. So it becomes important to understand how did this wrong knowledge became the knowledge of India? What is this problem method that was used, which became the method which gave a partial or a biased notion or a stereotyped idea of India, which we actually think is the knowledge of India, whereas Britishers gave it to us, and we don't see that it is not our knowledge in that sense. So that's one first unit. The second unit will be on caste. At the outset, I would like to say that you have to come to the classroom thinking that caste exists. I am not going to debate on the fact that caste doesn't exist or caste is kind of, is meaningless today. No, I will discuss in this unit that caste exists, and I will try to put you through the political economy of caste by talking about the characteristics of caste, how the characteristics of caste inherently is economic in nature, how this economy in the traditional societies got transferred due to in the economic sense in the British period, and how post British period also in the independent India also caste mattered when it comes to economy. For that, before that, in the introduction classes, I will tell you about different kinds of capitals, and I will tell you how economic capital is not the only form of capital, but there are other forms of capitals that contributes to economic capital. And to understand caste, we have to understand the different forms of capitals and how caste and class got merged in India in many ways. Okay, of course, I'm not saying that there has not been any change. Okay, sociologists would not say that there has been a lot of changes and all, but it is not changes in such a way that, like in the European society, the feudal structures got broken away, got kind of destroyed in some ways, and industrialization and others led to class system. In India, that did not happen. What happened is there began a caste class continuum in India. That means caste got converted into class in many ways. So the upper caste would become upper and middle classes. Of course, there are lower classes who are upper caste, but mostly the upper classes will be constituted by the upper caste. The lower caste, on the other hand, will be eventually became lower classes in India rather than middle and upper classes in India. Okay, there are definitely few percentage of lower castes who are middle classes. I don't think they're upper classes at all. Okay, and I don't know, maybe one, two individuals, but generally it is the lower castes who are in the lower classes. How did this happen? So caste did not get a rupture and become class in India, unlike the European system. In India, caste continue. There was a continuum between caste and class, and that is what also we will discuss. And ultimately, after all this background, I will come to the debate on reservation or whatever it is, like the positive discrimination, reservation, whatever you call it. Don't call it quota and other kinds of things. Yeah, it's a positive discrimination, reservation. We will discuss that, and we will see by the end of it. We will discuss this because I'm hoping that with all of these interactions and debates and discussions, maybe I will be able to kind of pass on this information to you, or kind of make you understand or show to you that yes, in India caste matters, and when we don't have other tools of addressing it, maybe positive discrimination is one of the way, even if it is not the most effective way, even if there are 100 other ways of misusing it, or whatever people call it, or whatever it is. But unless we develop a very concrete alternative to annihilating caste, okay, when I say annihilating caste, I'm taking from Ambedkar. Annihilating caste is completely destroying and kind of removing it from society, and not just keeping it as cultural social ways of life, but becoming modern when it comes to the workspaces. Can we actually be that? We cannot, and that is what we will get into. We will discuss reservation, positive discrimination. At the end of it, when I will if when I will explain you the political economy of caste, expecting that maybe all these explanations will help you understand why we need reservation. We can always disagree on it. Second one will be tribes in India. I will not get into, again, very specifically, I'm telling about the cultures and food habits and dressing patterns and history, etc. I will again get into the political economy of tribes, whereby I will be speaking about how does the Indian state look at tribes? Okay, how did they get kind of, and there's so much on tribes that a whole course can be made on it, and also that in caste and family and gender. But here I'll be mostly talking talking about how does Indian state look at tribes as a category, and how has their economy, culture, social lives, etc., been kind of affected through what we see as a construction of modern India. And in that process, I'll be bringing about dams and other kinds of industries and all those debates, but I'll see how to go about it. The third one is family and gender. And let me tell you that my specialization is on gender and law, gender violence and law. So I will be bringing a lot of examples in caste and tribes and other kinds of things on gender, on women, and which may make some of you very uncomfortable. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just trying to say this is that in family and gender, in family as an institution in India, though I will not be talking about, oh, family is so good, family is this, family. All of us know that family is a very supportive, very loving, very, necessary institution. But is there another side to that story? Okay. And that is where gender will come in. That is where I'll talk about women and LGBTQ groups, the queer groups. And I will try to show that what we think as the social norms, rules, regulations, values, and festivities, etc., of family, which definitely is a very important institution and can act as a very supportive, loving system necessary for every individual and groups. Yet inherently the discriminations and hierarchies of a society also maybe starts with families. And if family as an institution is marked by gender, then definitely the larger society cannot escape gender as an issue. And therefore, within family, I'll be discussing family as a political economy of family, and will bring in gender, and will explain to you how the political economy of family is actually impacting the larger legal, political, economic, and other kinds of system. And within that, where do men, women, and queer groups stand? Okay, we will discuss in that. The next thing is nationalism, secularism, and communalism. And I am given the time, whatever, I will be discussing what is nationalism. How was nationalism a very modern concept, and there was no idea of nation as such before French Revolution. Okay, this whole idea of India as a nation, in this as a US as a nation, or anything, etc. How is nationalism as a modern concept, and where did we forget this history? Plus, what does nationalism exactly mean? And is nationalism higher than humanism in some ways? That is one. But more importantly, I will be discussing through some lectures, videos, etc. of other scholars about what does Indian secularism mean. Okay, secularism can mean many things. Okay, how have our intellectuals and leaders, etc., conceived of secularism, and is our secularism different from what European secularism or US secularism is, and is there a positive to that, and how is it challenged today? So in nationalism, secularism, and communalism, I'll be discussing the concepts of nationalism and secularism, but more focused on the idea of what is this uniqueness about Indian secularism and how is it challenged today. So more or less, this will be your course outline. But I am again saying, given that it's online, given that so many, I mean, you may be having your own constraints, I will have my own constraints, etc. I have removed this 6th unit, which is on law, because I think this will be too much for an online class. Okay, so we will do this. This is the course outline. You can ask me questions on it, and more I'll elaborate in the next few classes. I will take it slow. Okay, I like taking it slow. I will go in depth into one unit and then take debates and questions and doubts from you. Okay. In terms of assignments and all, I will need some time to think about it, because I will see how many students are finally enrolling in this course and accordingly give assignments. But roughly, if I want to say to you, is that maybe I will form you into groups. Okay. And you can make presentations for like 30 marks or so. Okay, 10 minutes, 15 minutes presentation. We will see how to go about it depending on the numbers. Then one assignment I can give you in terms of writing, which you can do as group or you can do as individuals. We will see again depending on the numbers. That can be also of 30, 40 marks, which I can give you towards the end semester. Okay, towards the end of the semester. In the first half, I can do individual exam, one question or two questions. For all of this, I will give you time, at least 2 or 3 days time. Okay. Now the point is, I know that I don't expect all students to be very sincere and not copying from each other or not sharing answers, etc. and all. But if you can not do that and write your individual answers, because ultimately when I'm reading answers, I know which is coming. Last time I had 97 students and I knew who is taking is from whom. But anyway, this is online mode. I don't have much power on it. I don't care also at the end of it if you're understanding things and all. But the problem is you will care about grades. Okay, I will give grades according to what I think you have written. If I feel that you have copied from somewhere or you have just plagiarized from somewhere, etc., etc., and I will give you grades. You may not be happy with those grades, and I don't give grades. You can ask your seniors anyway. I'm not very bad at it, but I'm not giving A, B to everyone. So you can decide according to that also. My request is that all these assignments you will be given time. I'll not do it directly here online, or I'll not do it in a day. I will always give you questions or topics, etc., where you can prepare and write for 2 or 3 days or whatever it is. I just hope that you will be sincere to yourself and write. Otherwise, it's all right, as long as you're not arguing with me about grades. So that's the introduction to this course, and there are many things maybe I'm missing out. In the next few classes, I will start taking it, elaborating on it. I think in the next few classes, it will be more and more clear in terms of what this course involves. And once again, I would like to emphasize on the fact that, we all come from different backgrounds. We all come from different, we all have different experiences because of our cultural, social, political backgrounds. Okay. But I expect openness of mind, because all at the end of the day you have to do is be critical of things. It's critical doesn't mean criticizing others, etc. But there's a process of, learning is very, very easy compared to unlearning. We have been socialized in our family and community and religion, etc., or our states and etc., that we are this, okay, and this is the right way of doing. In this course, what I am going to do is, maybe we will unlearn more than learn, or in the process of learning we will unlearn a lot, and which is very, very difficult, because if I say caste exists, you may say, oh no, it doesn't exist. If I say that gender matters, you may say that no, this is thinking too much, you are a feminist. Yes, I'm a feminist, but if I can see the thing more broadly than a narrow point of view, then I would like you to urge, I will try to explain you why you should look through a feminist angle. Okay, or for that matter a Marxist angle, or for that a nationalist angle, or for that whichever angle helps us to see a broader picture than a smaller picture. So that is why I'm emphasizing more and more that if you're taking this course, okay, you be open to be critical, because critical thinking is a necessity for us to develop and for us to understand not just this course, but in general, our lives in society and nation and politics. If you're interested in understanding India better in a more critical manner, then take this course. If you're going to you're uncomfortable with what is going on in this classroom, maybe you should take some other course. That's my advice to you. Yeah, any questions, anything, any comments? Nothing.
Ma'am, what about attendance?
That I'll tell only after the last date is over of changing the course. As per now, attendance is compulsory because we have to sit SIMS report and give it. That's what was told to us, that we have to download attendance and give it to the academic section or whatever it is. I don't know. I mean, I have to find out. But yeah, attendance is compulsory. Unless you have some problem, I understand internet problems, etc. But I will be kind of downloading attendance.
Okay.
Okay.
Ma'am, I had a question. Ma'am, because
Yes.
of the topic such,
Is this
are there
Arjun?
any,
I mean, yeah.
yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Are there any correct answers?
No, there are no correct answers. But yes, this is a good question. Actually, I should tell this. See, there are no right or wrong answers, but that doesn't mean that your stereotypes and biases and your old socialization will come in without facts. Okay, like for example, I'll tell you one thing. I like, for example, if I say that that lower caste or classes make up lower caste. Okay, I mean lower castes make up lower classes. Okay, that means in India, caste has definitely changed, but if you go to class and see what class, who belongs to which classes, you will see that the lower caste constitute lower classes more. Okay, then one cannot bring in an answer and say that in my school there were 5 people whose fathers were IS officers, they were Dalits, and there were 5 people were IS officers, but they were taking reservation, and see they are in upper class or upper middle classes. Of course, these 5 people matter. It's not I'm rejecting them, but we are looking at the larger picture. And when I'm saying that lower classes constitute lower caste, is coming from a long line of study and surveys showing that the most lower castes are poor. Okay, there are poor in lower upper classes castes who are poor, but most lower castes are poor, whereas the percentage of upper class and middle class is more about upper caste and middle caste rather than the lower caste. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Is that, see, there is no right answer. There are different ways of answering things. But stereotypes and biases, and without reading, if you write from your everyday common experiences, maybe that will not work out, because I'll ask you a counter question. And I need to tell you this, I read every line of every answer. Okay, you ask your seniors. In fact, when it is offline teaching, we show answer papers there very easily. Here it becomes very difficult. I read each line of each answer paper. I give comments, elaborate comments on every paper, especially in mid-sem, so that you can look at it and all. So in that sense, yes, you there is no one way of answering things, but your answering things has to take into account the larger, broader picture of, and not the stereotyped common sense knowledge. And for that, you have to read. You have to read things that I am giving, and maybe a little more research on the topic that you are addressing and all that, a little more broader research. I know you don't have time for all these things, but still an openness of mind and not a very closed mind and giving an answer. So yeah, social science can be difficult in that sense. So yes, you can write different ways of answering, but it has to be factual in some ways, open in some ways. You cannot say that yes, Muslims are, suppose somebody writes that no, Muslims are growing in population like anything, and or that they are doing love jihad, and that is why there's a necessity to look at secularism differently. I mean, historically, socially, and with research, this isn't the true information. So you have to kind of this is what I'm saying. You have, if when I'm asking a question on love jihad, for example, okay, now that is going on so much, you cannot say that it is necessary because yeah, they are growing in population, they are converting everybody and all that. You have to take the larger picture into account. They may be doing it, you prove me, maybe I'll give you counter proofs about things. So yeah, don't worry. Largely, I will be looking at in an answer. I'll be looking at three things. Okay, one is that when I'm giving you readings, you have to read and bring those concepts into the answer. Two is, and more importantly, is general knowledge in terms of that concept. For example, if I'm talking about tribes and dams, okay, or tribes and development, and I'm giving you a question, I will give you readings on tribes. So you bring concepts from there and give your own examples with your own readings if you have more readings. So that way, it's a mixture of your own readings, current, I mean, in the sense, a little bit of touch in terms of current affairs and what is going on, a little bit of reading. I think what I have seen in the last years, 10 years of my teaching is that students who sincerely listen in the class and do a little and show interest in the topics write very good answers. So if you are interested, if I can make you interested in the course, and if you can put because if you're interested, you'll go read certain things in your spare time, or if some time, because you're interested, and then you will write a better answer. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question rightly, but yeah, it's complicated. Arjun, did you get anything out of this?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I don't know if yeah, it's difficult actually.
Ma'am, I have a comment on your statement.
Who is this?
I'm Ritesh Ranjan.
Ritesh, aha.
Ma'am, you told about the feminism is the better aspect to change make the world better. So
No, I
I
did
have
not say that. I did
no
not
you
say that.
whatever you said, I don't remember whatever.
I said feminism may give you a better lens to look at family as an institution.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So
No, that's all right. Tell me.
my comment is that feminism society sees the male as a victim. Matlab they are the real culprit and they have done everything. But if you will go in the root cause, you will find that it's not the male, it's the society. If you will see in the common family type, like if the bahu come, then whatever sas do, like these things, like you have to follow, like bahu have to follow these things. So the female is also like suppressing the female. So why male are being making they are culprit like these things? Or one more thing I would like to comment, the feminine society say why only females should cook, but they are not ready to accept a male who want to I want to cook and I don't want to do job. Like they want to, why I should cook, but a male who want to cook and don't want to do job, but they don't want to accept that. So I have why the feminism, like it's supported, that is the better way to see the world, or it will change, it will make the world better. But I think this thought are made just to make women more female more powerful, and when it should be in a limit, like if
Ritesh, can I interfere? Can I interfere?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I got what you're saying. One is that in my one sentence, you made up a whole story. Okay. And I would request you, if you're staying in the course, wait till we get into gender and family, and maybe you will understand feminism better and this whole system. And you will understand that feminism actually doesn't tell men are the culprits, but there's a whole system of patriarchy within which men are more powerful. No, wait. Now I'll interview you. This is what I'll do. Okay. I heard you. Okay. My point is, this is what I was trying to also tell Arjun in some ways, is that, or others in that sense, is that read. Where do you get your ideas on feminism? How many books on feminism and articles on feminism have we read? And how much do we know what they have debated, what they have fought, right? That's one thing. More importantly, whatever you are saying has answers in terms of family and gender. And I am going to deal with all that in that unit, okay? What I understand that, your exposure to the ideas on feminism comes through media, comes through general society, etc. But whatever the media and general society says, if that was always true, life would have been so much more easy, right? So the thing is, when I say a sentence that, when I'm talking about family and gender, and I say that, I will be open about debates and discussions and disagreements, But I will also emphasize on the fact that there are different lenses through which the world can be understood better. Okay, in that sentence, I am not telling anything about feminism, anything about what feminism explains, what happens in family and all, because I will go systematically and explain to you why is feminism important. Okay, one. I will also systematically go and explain to you that when women are mother-in-law, and I know this is a very common. See, I have been doing gender from 2001. Okay, I did my MPhil, I did my PhD, and before that I did my MA, and I taught courses here. I have been doing PhD students and all. So this is a very common question that keeps coming to me: is that women, mother-in-laws do expect this to for women. Women don't want to give up their housework. Women don't want. See, this is a whole system which makes us do certain things. We are socialized into certain ways, and that is gender socialization. And I will come to gender socialization to explain you why men and women behave in certain ways. Okay, why do they agree to patriarchy in certain ways? For example, in this, I'll give a parallel example. In this classroom, okay, how much ever you may not like my arguments, how much ever you may not like doing things the way I like doing things, etc., still you may agree to do with things in the way that I am telling. Maybe you will deflect, maybe you will not agree, maybe you will argue and say that this is all nonsense. Okay, but often as students, you will agree with me because I am more powerful, right? At the end of the day, how much ever I take talk in this course that hierarchies need to be dismantled, okay, the differential power needs to be questioned. At the end of the day, as a teacher, you know that I am powerful in certain ways, right? I don't have to explain it. So you will agree with me. Or for that matter, the administration of IIT, right? Because at the end of the day, your status, your standing is dependent on how close and how accepted you are by the administration or by the teacher, right? So power operates in many different ways, and that is why men and women behave and agree with patriarchy in some way. So I will come to this. Don't worry. If you're sticking around in this course, I will
So, ma'am,
explain this.
ma'am, if patriarchy is needed, so why people blame it patriarchy should
Listen,
not
listen,
be there?
listen. First of all, this is not a debate on feminism and patriarchy. This is my introduction class on
No,
sociology of
what I
India.
have feel like. Okay, sorry, ma'am,
No, no, no. Wait,
disrupt.
wait, wait. No, no, wait. I will take all these questions in the gender and family class. Okay, this is an introduction course. I'm not going to debate on feminism and gender right here, right now, because it's 1 o'clock and other people also have other works. What I'm saying is that your questions and your doubts, etc., are not irrelevant to me. It has to come at one point of time. Just because I use the term feminism, this class cannot become about feminism. One. Second is that maybe I will say that you should read a little more rather than take ideas from everyday common experiences, people sitting in drawing rooms and shops and talking, and media for that matter, which shows feminism in a wrong way. Maybe a small introduction to feminism book might help. What about that? And then anyway, we will deal with things, and I will give you endless time beyond class hours also to debate all this. Definitely. Believe me, ask your seniors. I can give endless hours to debates beyond classes also. But what I need is a sincere reading and openness from the other side, not debating just from your own personal experiences. Your personal experiences matters a lot, and I will give space to that. But what I want you to do is, after the debate of half an hour, I want you to go and think through things that I have said, not just go on arguing in the lines that you think is right, right? At the end of the day, I have read 12 years or 13 years or 20 years of feminist books and gender, right? You may not agree with me, but that is true. So at least by age, I have read more. Just the sheer fact that I am so much older than you, and I am doing on work on gender and feminism. So yes, this is what I was saying. You will not agree with me. You may get uncomfortable with me, but if you are going to feel uncomfortable and get angry about it, don't take this course. Not to Ritas, but everybody I'm telling. Yeah, Arjun.
Ma'am, I had one last question
Yeah.
for the answers, because are we allowed to quote from outside the syllabus? Like, for example,
Yeah, you are allowed to quote outside the
okay.
syllabus. You just have to justify, put it in the right justified place.
Okay, ma'am. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
You
you.
have to see. The thing is, you have to always think through the answer when you're writing. Okay. So when you're taking a quote outside from somewhere, suppose I have never given XYZ scholar, but you read and you thought it is relevant, you can always bring in. But you have to justify why that quote is very important there. Sorry, you have to explain it. Okay. You suppose, for example, say this is what it is. Okay. Then you say that how it is relevant to this question. So that's fine. I mean, you are not limited to only the readings that I'm giving. Anyone else?
Okay, ma'am.
Anything? Okay, I'm hoping that whoever stays back in this course will start speaking and asking and talking. Okay. Or writing. If you don't want to speak, you can write to me in the chat box and I will be taking it up. Okay, I was just thinking that that you must be now exploring many different courses, which one to take and which one not to take. So should I give a off tomorrow and start next week full-fledged? Is that fine with you all? Hello, at least this thing someone should answer.
No, and
Fine.
maybe like,
Sorry?
ma'am, maybe like you could take a class from us so that we can get to know how is this course more, like what you'll be talking more
Okay.
about.
Okay, okay. I was just thinking that if you take, because 21st is the last date of changing course, right?
Okay, and we didn't know about it, but yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, 21st. So what I'm thinking is if I don't take a class tomorrow, you can explore other courses. And then from next week, I can just go on so that in 2-3 days, you will know what this course is about.
Okay.
So I'm just giving you 1 day time to just go to other places and see what to do and what not to do about it. And don't worry, in the next two classes, you will know how it is. By Wednesday, Thursday, next time, you will know what if you want to be here or not. So
Okay.
maybe I will give a off tomorrow and start on Wednesday, coming Wednesday.
Okay.
I mean, if large number of you agree to that, can you raise your hands?
Agree.
Sorry. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
You know, class off is always nice for everyone, including me. Oh, okay, fine. Sorry, I mean, those who are not agreeing, I'm sorry. I'm also Titiksha. I hope you understand. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's fine.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thanks a lot. See you on Wednesday, coming Wednesday.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
ma'am,
Tell me.
I request you to please provide the appropriate resources because we have to come into your way that we have to support that whatever you say. So we want appropriate resources.
Yeah. Listen, I will be giving you readings. As soon as I start a unit, I will give you readings. Okay, and I will try to make it kind of I generally give readings from which will become the basis of your answer. So for that, I will give you readings, and then I will also suggest you if you want some links and some sites and websites where you can go and read more about those topics. Okay, I will
I
try
have
to
one
keep
comment.
it.
Like,
Sorry.
ma'am, is like source should be like one should be like supporting and other should be like counter supporting. So we will get better idea like that. So we can.
Listen, I don't know. Okay, that is something that I will not. It's not like a public debate, right? It's a classroom where I will go through very sociological text. Okay, I will go through researches done over years and years of research and I'll give. So, for example, yeah, in terms of reservation, one can find debates on it. In terms of gender violence, what will I give you to support it? For example, I'm just giving. Okay. In terms of industrialization and dams and tribes, I will give you positive. I mean, in terms of development and tribes, I can give you both sides. But in terms of communalism, what will I give you? Okay, so yeah, it's not always about a debate between two things, but this course is also to kind of because what happens is that see now just when Ritesh was asking me when Ritesh only okay, he was asking me the questions. Okay, let me make it very clear here. It is not like there are no positives to family. Okay, it is not like Indian secularism doesn't have positives. Okay, it is not like the tribes and development doesn't have any positives. I won't say that for caste. Okay, definitely caste has no positives. Okay, so the thing is There are things that you already know. There are things that you already believe. Okay. There are things that you already are socialized into. That is why I talked about unlearning. If I go on emphasizing on the positives of family, okay, what I will be doing is kind of reinforcing your beliefs and kind of make it's easy for me actually. If I come to a class and teach that caste doesn't exist, it's waning today and it hardly matters, you are happy, I am happy, I go back. But that's not what I'm here for, right? Or for family for that matter. You know that family is a supportive system, family is a loving system, family takes care, it has a lot of functions which are necessary for a society's survival. Do I have to repeat that? What I will have to do is my work is to show you that side which you are never shown in some ways. So my attempt will be that. So there are certain things in which I can give you readings positive and negative. I don't know if I should call it positive and negative, but counter and debates and counter debates. But there are certain topics in which I morally and politically and ethically cannot give you a count. I mean, there are people who are countering it. I can send you links, etc. But yes, the readings that I will be giving you is not about debates and counter debates. The readings that I will be giving you is to kind of, that's why I emphasize on the idea of critical thinking, which will not put you today. What the whole debate scenario is about, bringing five people and screaming and shouting. That's not what we are going to do. This is a course on sociology. You are going to learn to critically think through things, and critical thinking means to open up. I always tell this to my class, all my class, all the courses that I take, both in MA and in BTech, that maybe there's this whole idea of there's something called sociological imagination. What sociological imagination emphasizes on is that we have to critically think, and that is like the Siva's third eye. We are seeing things, but we are not recognizing what is happening there. So in that sense, we see our family, we see our society, we see our law, we see our politics, but we do not understand the internal functioning of it in many ways. Sociology of India will help you open up that critical thinking, and I will be giving you readings which will give you tools to analyze things in a much more critical way than commonsensical knowledge. That is what I was emphasizing when I was talking about feminism or caste or anything like that. I'm not sure if you are looking for something like positives and negatives. I don't think that this is what the course is aiming to do. It is aiming to make you think in depth and critically through institutions and processes and functions, rather than actually kind of seeing positive and negative in both of in any topic. Yeah, I don't know if I'm answering you rightly. Yeah, anyone else? Saksham, you want to ask something? Or Darshana, your hands are up, so that's why.
Ma'am,
Ankit, yeah. No, Ankit is asking something. Who is asking? Okay, I don't know if anyone is asking anything. Should I end the class now? Okay, I don't. Yeah, fine. Thank you so much, and we will see. I will take the class coming Wednesday.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, bye.